Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.
Good evening. The Vice President of the United States, George Bush, arrived in Boise about 45 minutes ago. He'll be stumping here tonight for Republican Senator James McClure at a Republican rally. And another top Reagan administration official, Agriculture Secretary John Block, has also been in the state today. That amounts to a curious mix of Republican politics and grasshoppers that bring the two to Idaho, and that will be our focus tonight. First, though, the Vice President. He is at the Boise airport right now with my colleague, Jean McNeil. Jean?
Mr. Vice President, 2 weeks ago you were quoted as saying that you would debate Geraldine Ferraro. The President is now saying that there should be at most 2 debates and implying strongly that they should be presidential debates. First, do you still plan to debate Geraldine Ferraro? And second, how do you answer the charge that your campaign is ducking that issue?
I answer the campaign's not ducking the issue. It's August. I haven't even been nominated by my party, and there's great pressure on it. I am willing to debate her. And I just don't think I think the answer is no decisions have been made on that. But I had to predict, I'd predict there'd be debates.
Presidential confidant Lynn Nofziger was quoted as saying that he doesn't see any gain for the Republicans in a Bush-Ferraro debate. Do you disagree with that?
Well, I haven't talked to him about it, and I'm very interested in doing what I want to do, which is to keep the focus on the top of the ticket. So I'll talk to him about it, but I'm not sure that I'd agree with his statement. In your mind, though, the President's words have left the door open for that debate? Oh, I think the door's open. Yes, I do.
Closer to home, Idaho Congressman George Hansen was convicted on 4 felony counts of filing false financial disclosure reports. He was reprimanded last week by the House. Do you support his re-election? Yes, I support the Republican keeping this seat in Republican hands. This is an open primary state. It would be presumptuous for me to suggest that the voters should do something, you know, should be told by me how to do it. There is an appeals process, but let the voters make this determination. Let the system work. There has been a primary here, and I'll support the nominee. But you do support Mr. Hansen? I support Mr. Hansen. I support the nominee. I mean, I don't want to get into the appeals process and all of that. Let that determination be worked. He's entitled to a free appeal without a lot of outside influence on that. Is that where the line would be if a congressman, any congressman's appeal failed and he were facing a prison term? Could Republicans Well, I don't think one could serve if one's in prison, could one? In other words, it's not like the Democrats in Boston, I don't think. But at this point, despite his conviction and the reprimand and the fact that he faces a prison term, you are willing to support him? I will support the nominee of this party, absolutely. He is the nominee of this party. I'll support him. We don't need any more Democratic seats. We got so many too many now, so I'm going to support the nominee of the party. And I think all Idahoans, which is much more important because that's what's going to determine this election, are going to support the nominee of the party. You and President Reagan in recent days have both been talking about something that you call revenue increases. You have eliminated the possibility of increasing personal individual income taxes, talking about possible revenue increases. You were quoted in Seattle yesterday when asked what those revenue increases might be as saying, just figure that out. My question, I guess, is why should you? We're not planning any revenue increases. And it's Mondale who is campaigning on raising everybody's taxes, raising revenue. We are not. Now, my question, I'm referring all tax questions to the expert, and the expert tax raiser is Mr. Mondale. And they raised everybody's taxes during the Carter-Mondale days in an unprecedented way. So if you want to talk about raising taxes, I'm referring people to him because that's his proposal. That's what he wants the American people to do. What I have said is, revenue increases can come through an expanded economy. The deficit's going to be $30 billion less than the Democrats are talking about because the economy's expanding. You can close loopholes and raise revenue. So there's a lot of ways to do it, but we want to get that spending down further before we even consider that. Mr. Vice President, I'm getting the signal that we're out of time. Getting the hook? Thank you for joining us. Okay. Mark?
While the Vice President is in Idaho today for presidential and senatorial politics, the Agriculture Secretary was here mending Republican political fences. Idaho farmers all across the southern part of the state are burned up right now about a grasshopper invasion that they and the Democratic governor are blaming on the Reagan administration's budget cuts.
With grasshoppers, maybe 125 of them to the square foot in some places, threatening to devastate millions of dollars in southern Idaho cropland, U.S. Agriculture Secretary John Block went to Mountain Home today. The Secretary was engaging in a little political and insect damage control, promising farmers that the federal government would do what it could about the hoppers this year and would try to do even better next year.
Maybe we've not addressed it as aggressively as we might have, but we're going to do what we can under the circumstances. And I want to get a look at the situation so that we can be prepared next year, which could be a worse year, especially if we have a warmer spring. And we'll be prepared to move in early and really provide a knockout blow.
And while the farmers, some of them with crops already badly damaged, were polite, they were also wondering why it had taken so long to get even a little federal help.
I think it would be our hope and desire that very possibly we could have this in line so that we can do it within say a week or a 10-day period for next year. And heaven help us, I don't know what we're going to do this year. Before we get done, I don't know what the outcome is going to be. They're flying. It's just like a snowstorm over my car when I drive down the roads.
Block later saw for himself the damage the grasshoppers have done in this part of Elmore County. And the Secretary couldn't even escape grasshoppers later when he met with reporters in Boise. He captured one here on the fly, and then seemed to reject Governor John Evans's call that the federal government should reimburse Idaho farmers even if they aren't insured for their damages.
I have to tell you that we don't have precedent for that I'm aware of, first of all, and secondly, I'm not even sure that you can just go out and do it. That would be equivalent to giving grants in aid to producers based upon the spraying that they have done, and I don't think that there's precedent for it, or that I don't know it even can be done.
There were smiles all around later when Block came out of a meeting with Evans, and the governor seemed to accept the Secretary's assurances that everything possible was being done.
Well, what can you say after the fact? I said last week it was too little, too late. Essentially, that's still the position. But what can he say at this point? He's doing all he can under the circumstances. He said, I take full responsibility. I'm the Secretary of Agriculture, and those are my agencies, and I'll do whatever is necessary to make sure next year is done differently than when it's done this year.
It is rare indeed that two major Republican administration or Democratic administration figures are in Idaho on the same day. This is not exactly the crossroads of big-time election year politics. And nearly everyone, of course, is already counting that the Reagan-Bush ticket will win in Idaho this November and possibly win very big here again. Still, the visit of the Vice President and the Agriculture Secretary indicates at least that the presidential campaign season is really picking up. For more on that, we're joined tonight by top officials in the Reagan and Mondale campaigns in this state. Lieutenant Governor David Leroy is the Idaho Finance Chairman of the Reagan-Bush campaign in Idaho, and Larry LaRocco, a former Democratic candidate for Congress, co-chairs the Mondale-Ferrero campaign in this state. Welcome to both of you, gentlemen. Mr. Leroy, let me start with you. You spent some time, I know, with the Agriculture Secretary today. Was he really repairing political damage by coming and seeing the grasshoppers firsthand and offering some assurances?
Well, I think it was important for the Secretary to be here, important for the administration, important for the farmers, and probably important for the state as well. This is not merely a federal problem. You can't call these federal grasshoppers because we have state lands and private lands intermingled with federal lands. None of those lands are immune as producers of grasshoppers. None of those lands are immune from the ravages of those grasshoppers. But what the Secretary did, as was evident from your clip, was to get out there, to walk the land, to see the lay of the land and the damage, and to have that people-to-people, face-to-face contact with those farmers under the distressful situations. There was talk about how we could prevent it next year, how we would react to it next year, about implementing those systems to react within a week or 10 days. And the sum of that is a demonstration by the administration and by the Agricultural Secretary that we care, about Idaho and we care about the conditions in Idaho. That's always good politics, even if the damage is not properly laid at the administration's door.
So it's not so much politics as just good stewardship.
Well, it's good stewardship, obviously in a political season, at a political time, in a political context. But the point is, this is an agriculture secretary that I think would have come any year, given the circumstances that we had here in Idaho this year.
Mr. LaRocco, from where you sat on the Democratic side of things, were Republicans worried that the grasshoppers were becoming an issue that might hurt them?
Well, I think so. There was some damage control that I think had to be dealt with here, and the Secretary was out here doing that, and it was timely for him to be here with the second top Republican in the nation, the Vice President. And I think all Idahoans are very pleased to have the Vice President in Idaho, but I think there was some damage control that was definitely being done. It was not a timely visit. I think he had to face some realistic facts of life here with the grasshoppers and the late response of the federal bureaucracy to our problems here.
Was there a late response, Mr. Leroy?
Yes, there was a late response, but it's not solely, again, attributable to the situation of federal red tape or federal inaction, insensitivity. This is a problem that has to be dealt with in three ways, at three levels. The private sector has to be organized and active. The state has traditionally had a role, a financial role in the spraying for this kind of pest, and we've not appropriated monies for that purpose in the last couple of years. And of course the major landholder, the major source of this kind of damage control is the federal government. The state pleas did not come out as early as they might have. The federal government did not respond as quickly as it might have, in part because this was a very unique and late developing grasshopper situation. It was atypical. The atypical response was not adequate to deal with this late developing difficulty.
Well, to both of you, do these events, having these big-name politicians come to a state, whether they're Republican or Democrat, do they make any difference to how people view the campaign as it shapes up, Mr. LaRocco?
Oh, absolutely. I don't think there's any question about that. When the Vice President of the United States comes to a state like Idaho with only 4 electoral votes, I think it's significant. And I think
they're not worried about losing Idaho.
Well, they're not worried about.
Right?
No, but they are worried about some things. If I may be so bold as to say that I think the Republican Party is not as strong as it has been in prior years, and I think it's headed downhill, mainly because of George Hansen. I really think that the moderates and the ultra-conservatives are in a big battle here in the state, and I think the Vice President is here to lend credibility to Senator McClure's campaign. But in the meantime, I think that George Hansen is in a lot of trouble. I just think he's in deep, deep trouble. I think
and that's hurting the party up and down.
You bet. Moderate Republicans may tell you off the record, I wish they would tell you on the record on this show, that they're scared that the coattails will go right down to the legislative races here. And I think that they're also very scared that they're not laying a good base for the races that are coming up in 1986, where there's the thought that former Governor Andrus may run for that seat again, and that Governor Evans may run against Steve Sims. So as I saw the party building itself in the late 70s and really maintaining some strength, I think it's on the way down. And I think the Democrats have maintained its strength here in the state. We have a good chance of maintaining a veto-proof Senate, and we're running, some fairly good campaigns in the state, although I don't think Senator McClure is in much trouble. The biggest problem he has this year is how to spend the money he's raising.
Well, Governor Leroy, you've heard the Democratic analysis of Republican motives there. Do you agree with any of that?
That's wishful thinking. On the contrary, the Republican Party, in my opinion, has never been stronger in this state. True, we have a difficult situation with Congressman Hansen. He traditionally has run, however, fairly independent organizations and fairly independent races, while he has helped up and down the ticket in the past and will be doing less of that. I think that the Hansen situation will resolve itself and basically be confined to the Hansen situation, rather than to be a general condition attributable to the party or the party's philosophy.
You wouldn't disagree, though, that there is a lot of concern in Republican ranks about how that situation might affect all Republican candidates?
Oh, there's a good deal of concern. My point is this, that the Republican Party has been recruiting. We have brilliant candidates for the legislature. We have very strong and attractive young and articulate candidates for the courthouses. I think we'll see some gains in the legislature, even above those phenomenal numbers that we already have. And while the Democratic focus this year in state races has to be to try to take out Congressman Hansen, and is also confined to trying to preserve the veto the veto sustaining ability of the state Senate. That's a fairly modest and fairly practical goal for the party. But the fact that their goal is so modest and so practical is attributable to Republican strength that we have now and that we will carry after November.
30 seconds for a rebuttal. Mr.
Okay.
Lawrence.
I think if we looked at Kootenai County, where the moderates are calling the ultra-conservatives kooks on the front page of the newspaper, where the young Republicans are playing the old hatchet man job here, and the chairman of the Republican Party is feigning innocence on this type of thing, is absolutely ridiculous and shows some disarray among the Republican ranks. These charges by innuendo that they're coming out with against major Democratic people is childness, it's adolescent, and the Republican Party has to stand by the behavior of Representative Strasser. I think it's extremely immature and bad politics for them to be playing these games.
You're talking about Representative Mike Strasser from Nampa, who a week ago or 2 weeks ago called a news conference to talk about bad things that Democrats were doing and then called it off at the last minute. And
Right. This is some sort of a ploy to detract attention, I think, from Hansen's race in the 2nd district.
Let me go back, though, to your original point, which I think was that bringing a George Bush and a John Block here tends to unify the ranks and mute some of this
That's right.
dissension up and down.
Well, I saw it as an observer, political observer. I saw people going off in so many different directions that as a Democrat, I thought that I was watching this whole thing unravel on the other team. Now, mind you, I did that with a smile on my face because we're hopeful that '86 is going to be a good year for us. And while we're strengthening and you're watching the opposition weaken, that's a good political position to be in. I also think that within the own ranks in the Republican Party in the state legislature, that House Representative Stivers, the Speaker, will probably be facing a tough battle, which proves that his ultra-conservative approach to lawmaking in the state is not welcome by the moderates. I think you may also see a battle shape up in the Senate. Perhaps Phil Batt will run against James Risch. I don't know, but I think that I'm watching some seething going on here in the ranks, and I think that bringing George Bush, the Vice President, into the state is a solidifying, a calming type of maneuver. And again,
good politics.
Not bad.
Okay.
Not bad.
Just a quick comment, and then we'll move along to the races that you two will be watching more closely.
Always glad to have compliments from Mr. LaRocco about the Republican soothing effects. Fact is, the Republican Party is plenty broad. We're broad enough to have extremely conservative people and moderates. We get together and have our intramural discussions. The fact is that we have a very active, very active young Republican group. Sometimes they hit it perfectly, and sometimes there's a discordant note in some of their attempts. But the fact is we're young, we're aggressive, we're a party of common philosophies and plenty of breadth to the party. We're strong, and try us in November.
Okay. Let me turn to the presidential race. Mr. LaRocco, 4 years ago, Ronald Reagan used a famous line that helped him get reelected by all accounts when he asked people, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? What's the answer to that question today?
Will you be better off in 4 years than you are right now? That's the question that I think will be asked in the 1984 presidential election. And I think Mondale and Ferraro are headed down the track of asking that question and getting the campaign started. I watched the Vice President on your video screen here, and I get the impression that maybe they don't think there should be a campaign this year. The hard questions shouldn't be asked about tax policies, foreign policy, the commitment to a saner nuclear policy in this world. But those questions are going to be asked, and I hope they're asked in a debate format.
But by rephrasing the question as you did, that implies that things are better off now than they were 4 years ago.
They could be. We have to concede some things. I think Vice President Mondale, our nominee for the presidency, responded well in a very upfront way at the convention when he mentioned that there were some mistakes made during that administration, but that he's been out listening to the people. And I think we've got some plans on track, some strategies, and some issues that will bring people towards the Democratic Party in 1984. Already the polls are showing that it's a dead heat right now, and I think it's due to Mondale being on the offensive, being a better candidate against the major opposition, that is Ronald Reagan, than he is against Gary Hart in intramural fighting, and with our exciting vice presidential candidate.
Governor Leroy, the flip side of that is that maybe the economy is better today, but Ronald Reagan also has to take some of the responsibility for the worst recession since the 30s. unemployment is still historically very high. Interest rates, while down from the Carter years, are still historically very high. Are we better off?
I think we'll take Mr. LaRocco's concession. We are better off. I think the American people are going to ask exactly the same question with which you began this discussion. Are we better off 4 years ago than we were? And they won't answer it with a question. They'll answer it with the answer, which is yes. Statistically, on interest rates, inflation, the kinds of numbers of Americans that are actually employed currently, we're clearly better off. And not only are we able to support that statistically, but there's an intangible feeling about this country, a patriotism, a pride, something I think perhaps each of us feels at home at night when we watch a successful American competition in the Olympic events. Just that little bit of glisten in your eye. There's a pride about this country, domestically and internationally, that we haven't had for a long time, that in addition to the statistics, I think it's going to give this president a very sound return to office. We badly need a steady hand for 8 consecutive years at the tiller of this country. The flip-flops we've had in policy have been one of the most devastating things that the American public and the American nation has had in recent years. A consistency of policy, and particularly the policies of this president, I think is going to be the comfort and the choice of every American voter, or many, many American voters in November.
He stated it right, hasn't he, from the Republican point of view?
Well, from the Republican point of view, I don't think he did a bad job, but when we get that glisten in our eye and we're feeling more patriotic, my 2 children don't feel that we live in a safer world. And I think that the fact that this administration has just shut down negotiations with the Soviet Union, and they just refused to deal with the nuclear arms race in a straightforward, realistic manner, I think does not bode well for the future of this country at all. And I think those are particular issues that are really frightening people. There is a gender gap out there. There's no question about the fact that people feel estranged from this administration, particularly the women in this country. And we can flex our muscles and try and put the issues under the rug and feel machismo and so forth, but I think the gender gap is a real issue in this country. And I think this tax issue is going to be very interesting in the coming weeks as this campaign unfolds and it develops. Because,
how so?
Well, there's a nuance in what the Vice President is saying and also the President. They're saying that we don't plan on raising personal income taxes. They haven't said anything about a value-added tax. They haven't said anything about a flat tax. Even the Vice President here said that they may be looking at closing some loopholes. Now, we're getting into a semantic issue here, and I think the Vice President Mondale, that is, our nominee, is going to deal with this question and finally try and get a platform plank out of this administration. And I think this could lead to a fight at the Republican convention, but I'll let the Lieutenant Governor deal with that.
Well, let me ask him right on that point. Hasn't, by virtue of what Mondale has said about anyone who's elected in November is going to have to raise taxes, hasn't he put, in effect, the Republicans somewhat on the defensive by saying that? They don't really know how to respond.
The former Vice President, Democratic nominee's ploy in this regard, I think, is the only way that he can deal with his personal record and the Carter-Mondale record on the issue of taxes. For instance, I think there's a great spirit abroad in the country, given the deficit situation we now face, to support a constitutional amendment to the U.S. Constitution to balance the budget and require a balanced budget. Yet the nominee of the Democrats has consistently opposed that position. By taking the attack, by attributing the intentions that he has had in the past and the intentions that he honestly must endorse if he's going to fund all these programs he's sponsored and encouraged special interests, saying that not only will I raise taxes, but somebody else would have to too, as a way of diverting his own position into somebody else's camp. And I think the President has, as clearly as he possibly can, and so did the Vice President, deal with that issue. We'll not raise taxes, period. Those who see semantics or find shades of meaning there, I think are looking for those shades of meaning desperately, because if Mondale is the only candidate for president who has pledged to raise taxes, he will not be the president.
Mr. LaRocco?
I think the constitutional amendment on this balanced budget is nothing but a smokescreen. President Reagan, as candidate Reagan in 1979 and 1980, was able to pull this off. He was talking about supporting a constitutional amendment, supporting a balanced budget. We've now had the highest budget deficits that we've ever had in the history of this country, and we could talk about statistics and how they add up and all that baloney. But the fact is that they're the highest they've ever been. The other thing is that that I may be looking for a hidden meaning in what they're saying. I'm just trying to pin them down. After all, this is the administration. They have to come in with their own program. They have to stop blaming it on Tip O'Neill in the Congress. Let's hear what their program is. Let's put it on the line. Let's debate the issues, and let's get on with the campaign. Again, I get back to this, this whole aura that I feel about this candidacy and this team, that they don't feel that the opposition party should be playing the role of opposition. What the heck do they think is going on in this country? We've got to have a dialogue and a discussion, put the programs down, our foreign policy down, our economic planks, our ways to deal with human rights and other issues that are of importance to this country, and let's talk about it. If they say they're not going to raise taxes, what the Vice President said in Portland yesterday was, we won't raise personal income taxes. If there's a plan for value-added taxes, if there's a plan for a consumption tax, if there's a plan to erase the loopholes, let's hear about it. I want to see a plan, and I think all America wants to see a plan, of how we're going to reduce the budgets. Let's quit talking about the recovery coming up and reducing the budget by $30 billion. That's fine. We can talk about that statistically and its proportion of the total deficits, but we've got to do better than that. We've got to do better than that to have a real recovery.
Quick comment, Mr. Leroy?
I have no fear that this campaign will develop a number of specifics, and one of the specifics will be the fact that numerous administration plans sent to the Congress with regard to specific budget trims or balancing measures have indeed been held hostage by Tip O'Neill and a Democrat majority in the House. There'll be plenty of specifics, but one of the specifics that there won't be is the successful attribution of Mondale's tax increase plans into the Republican camp. We won't do it, the Democrats will.
2 minutes left. Let me talk about the Ferrero factor. Big factor, Mr. LaRocco?
In Idaho specifically, I think it will be. In fact, I'll predict tonight that we'll do probably 10% better in this state than the Carter Mondale.
Largely because she's on the ticket?
I believe so. I believe so. I believe that the gender gap is so strong that that will bring people to this ticket. Also, I think...
Let me get Mr. Leroy to respond just to that point.
No, the Ferrero factor is one of early interest only. She makes the ticket more exciting. A conventional, uninspired Mondale would be swiftly consigned to the junk heap of history. She makes people want to take a look at it more, but when they look at both the ticket and her personal views, that will be relatively unattractive to the conservative Idaho voter.
I don't think our candidate is uninspiring, but I think he's a pretty decent human being.
Well, let me ask the conventional thing about Ferrero, that she's liberal, she's from the East, she supports abortion, all these liberal positions that have never sold in Idaho.
Well, first of all, I think that she has a lot of qualities that really appeal to Idaho voters. First of all, she's a self-made person. She's brought herself up from the bootstraps. She has put herself through school. She has gone on to become a lawyer. She's gone on to be a prosecutor, be hard on drug peddlers and people skipping out on their...
And she's a woman.
And she's a woman, you bet.
And Republicans do have some trouble with women, don't they? I mean, in terms of the gender gap and...
I think not. The gender gap statistically shows up in polls as the preference of one sex over the other sex in a different percentile voting for a particular candidate, in this case Ronald Reagan. But that's certainly not anything that is properly laid to the administration and its record of supporting and enhancing women's positions in this country.
Well, Mr. Leroy and Mr. LaRocco, it's very good of you to join us tonight and do as good a job as you have articulating the positions of your candidates. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
That's our time for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. I'm Mark Johnson. Good night.
Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.